The crack of a gunshot echoed through Lonesome Creek, sending Tessa Grantham's heart racing as she clutched her sleeping 3-year-old daughter closer to her chest. Ducking behind the weathered, clapboard church at the edge of town, she pressed her back against the splintered wood, her breath coming in shallow gasps that clouded in the cool October air of 1873. The sounds of shouts and breaking glass from the saloon down the street meant her husband's creditors had finally lost their patience. Tessa's fingers trembled as she smoothed back Sarah's dark curls. The child stirred slightly, but remained asleep, mercifully unaware of their desperate situation. The fabric of Tessa's once fine dress was worn thin at the elbows, patched repeatedly over the months since Benjamin Grantham had gambled away their savings and disappeared into the night, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises. The sun was setting fast, painting the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The temperature would drop quickly once darkness fell, and Tessa had nowhere to go. The boarding house had turned her out that morning when she couldn't pay. Her plan to catch the eastbound stage to her sister's home in St. Louis now seemed impossible with Harlan McCoy and his thugs searching the town for her. The sharp sound of boot heels on hard-packed dirt made Tessa freeze. She tucked herself tighter against the church wall, into the shadows beneath a small window, praying whoever approached would pass by. Sarah stirred against her chest, making a small whimpering sound. "Shoo, sweetheart," Tessa whispered, pressing her lips to her daughter's forehead. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. Tessa held her breath. "Madam." The voice was deep but gentle. "I don't mean to frighten you, but you don't look like you ought to be hiding behind a church with nightfall coming on." Tessa looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. She could make out the broad shoulders, the unmistakable shape of a cowboy hat, and at his hip, the gleam of a holstered revolver. Her grip tightened protectively around Sarah. The man took a step closer, dropping to one knee several feet away, bringing his face into view. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with kind eyes and several days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. Nothing about him suggested he was one of McCoy's men. "Name's Declan Zimmerman," he said, keeping his voice low. "I work at the Double Cross Ranch outside of town. Saw what happened at the saloon earlier. Those men looking for you." Tessa hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger. But Sarah was shivering now, and she had few options. "Yes," she admitted finally. "My husband left debts. They think I have money hidden away." The cowboy Declan nodded thoughtfully. "And do you have money hidden away?" "No," Tessa said, a bitter laugh escaping her. "Benjamin left me with nothing but his unpaid loans and a tarnished name." Something in Declan's expression softened. He glanced at the sleeping child in her arms. "That's your little one?" Tessa nodded. "Sarah, she's 3. Declan stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Mrs. Grantham." "Tessa Grantham." "Mrs. Grantham, I don't mean to alarm you, but those men are working their way through town, building by building. Won't be long before they check behind this church." He glanced over his shoulder toward the main street. "I've got a horse tied up behind the general store. I can take you and your daughter to the Double Cross. You'll be safe there until we figure something out." Tessa stared at him, torn between suspicion and desperate hope. "Why would you help us? You don't know me." Declan's mouth curved into a slight smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "My ma raised me to believe that when you see someone in trouble, especially a lady and her child, you lend a hand. It's just the right thing to do." He extended his hand toward her. "I promise you'll be safe. Both of you." The sincerity in his eyes made Tessa's decision. She reached out and placed her hand in his. "Thank you," she whispered. Declan helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed slightly. "Can you run? We need to move quick and quiet." Tessa nodded, adjusting Sarah in her arms. The little girl was beginning to wake, her eyes fluttering open. "Mama," she murmured. "Shoo, sweetheart. We're going on an adventure," Tessa soothed, brushing a kiss against her daughter's cheek. Declan led them along the back of the church and through a narrow alley between buildings. They paused at each corner, Declan checking carefully before signaling them forward. When they reached the back of the general store, a sturdy chestnut gelding waited, stamping impatiently. "Ever ridden double before?" Declan asked, untying the reins. Tessa shook her head. "Not since I was a girl." I'll hold Sarah. You mount first, then I'll hand her up to you, and I'll get on behind." When Tessa hesitated, he added, "I know it's not proper, madam, but it's the safest way for all three of us." Tessa nodded, understanding the necessity. With Declan's help, she settled into the saddle, then reached down for Sarah, who was now fully awake and watching the tall cowboy with curious eyes. "Hello there, little lady," Declan said softly. "You mind if I lift you up to your mama?" Sarah studied him solemnly, then nodded. "Up, please." Declan smiled and carefully handed the child up to Tessa, then swung himself into the saddle behind them. His arms came around Tessa to hold the reins, creating a secure circle around mother and child. "Hold tight now," he murmured near Tessa's ear. "We'll take it slow until we're out of town, then we'll need to ride hard for a bit." The intimacy of their position made Tessa's cheeks warm despite the cool evening air. It had been so long since she'd felt protected rather than threatened by a man's nearness. She nodded, unable to speak past the unexpected lump in her throat. They moved quietly through the back ways of Lonesome Creek, avoiding the main street where lanterns now blazed in the saloon windows and angry voices could be heard. As they passed the livery stable at the edge of town, shouts erupted behind them. "There! That's Grantham's woman." Declan didn't hesitate. "Hold on tight," he ordered, and kicked the horse into a gallop. The chestnut leaped forward, powerful muscles bunching as it raced away from town. Tessa clutched Sarah with one arm and gripped the saddle horn with the other, feeling Declan solid and steady behind her. The thunder of hoofbeats behind them told her McCoy's men were in pursuit. "They're following," she cried over the wind rushing past them. "Not for long," Declan assured her. He guided the horse off the main trail and into the trees, following what appeared to be a game trail that wound through the pines. The gelding seemed to know the way, picking its path confidently even as darkness settled fully around them. The sounds of pursuit gradually faded, but Declan kept them moving at a steady pace, deeper into the wilderness. Sarah had fallen back asleep, lulled by the rhythm of the horse's gait and exhausted by the excitement. "Are we safe?" Tessa asked after what seemed like hours. "For now," Declan replied, his voice a rumble she could feel against her back. "McCoy's men won't follow us into these woods at night. Too many places for a man to get ambushed." He slowed the horse to a walk, allowing the animal to catch its breath. Overhead, stars had emerged, brilliant pinpricks of light in the vast Montana sky. In the distance, Tessa could see the silhouette of mountains against the night horizon. "The ranch is still a good hour's ride," Declan said. "How are you holding up?" Tessa realized she was trembling, whether from cold or fear or simple exhaustion. She couldn't tell. "I'm all right," she said, not entirely truthfully. Declan seemed to sense her distress. He stopped the horse beside a small creek and dismounted smoothly. "Let me help you down. We'll rest here for a few minutes." Tessa handed Sarah down to him, noting the gentle way he cradled the sleeping child. Then he reached up for Tessa, his hands strong and steady at her waist as he lifted her from the saddle. Her legs wobbled when her feet touched the ground, and she would have fallen if Declan hadn't caught her. "Easy now," he murmured, keeping one arm around her while still holding Sarah. "You've had quite a day." Tessa looked up at him, at this kind stranger who had risked himself to help her and her daughter, and felt tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Declan's expression was gentle in the starlight. "No need for thanks. Let's get you both to safety, and that'll be thanks enough." He settled Sarah carefully on a soft patch of grass near the creek, wrapping his own coat around her like a blanket. Then he helped Tessa sit beside her daughter. "I'll water the horse," he said. "Then we'll move on." As he led the gelding to drink, Tessa watched him, trying to make sense of this unexpected turn of events. Since Benjamin had abandoned them 6 months ago, kindness had been in short supply. People who had once welcomed them to dinner now crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. The debts Benjamin had left behind had tainted her by association. Yet this cowboy, this stranger, had put himself between her and danger without hesitation. It awakened something in her that she thought had died along with her marriage hope. Declan returned, offering her his canteen. "Drink," he encouraged. "It's a dry night." Tessa accepted gratefully, taking several long swallows of cool water before handing it back. "What will happen when we reach your ranch?" she asked. Declan settled beside her, keeping a respectful distance. The Double Cross is owned by Frank and Martha Callahan. Good people. Martha's been after Frank to hire help for the house since their daughter married and moved to California. I reckon she'd be mighty pleased to have you stay on, if you're willing to work. I can cook, clean, so whatever's needed, Tessa said quickly. I'm not afraid of hard work. Declan smiled. Never thought you were, Mrs. Grantham. Please, call me Tessa, she said, surprising herself with the offer of familiarity. Tessa, he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her heart flutter strangely. We should get moving. It's a clear night, but the temperature will keep dropping. He helped her to her feet and then gathered Sarah into his arms once more. The little girl stirred but didn't wake, instinctively curling into the warmth of Declan's chest. The sight of her daughter so trusting with this man brought a fresh wave of emotion to Tessa's throat. They mounted as before, with Tessa in the saddle and Declan behind her, his arms creating a secure circle around them both. As they rode through the night, Tessa found herself leaning back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. The Double Cross Ranch came into view just as the eastern sky began to lighten with the promise of dawn. It was larger than Tessa had expected, a sprawling main house, a bunkhouse, barn, corrals, and several outbuildings spread across a valley with mountains rising beyond. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, it looked well-maintained and prosperous. As they approached, a dog began to bark, and a lantern flared to life on the porch of the main house. A stocky figure stepped out, shotgun in hand. Who's there? Called a gruff voice. It's Declan, Mr. Callahan, he called back. Bringing guests. The shotgun lowered, and the man on the porch stepped forward as they rode into the yard. He was in his 50s, with a weathered face and iron-gray hair, dressed in nightclothes with a hastily donned coat. Zimmerman? What in tarnation are you doing bringing folks here at this hour? He demanded, though his tone held more curiosity than anger. Declan dismounted and helped Tessa down, then carefully lifted the still sleeping Sarah from her arms. This is Mrs. Tessa Grantham and her daughter Sarah, he explained. They needed help, Mr. Callahan. Some trouble in town. Before Frank Callahan could respond, the door opened again, and a plump, gray-haired woman in a flannel nightgown and shawl stepped out. Frank, what's happening? She peered at the newcomers, her expression shifting from confusion to concern when she saw Tessa's exhausted face and the child in Declan's arms. Oh my goodness. Bring them inside, right now. The poor things look half frozen. Martha, we don't know, Frank began, but his wife cut him off with a wave of her hand. Hush, Frank. If Declan brought them here, there's a good reason. She bustled forward, wrapping an arm around Tessa's shoulders. Come along, dear. Let's get you and your little one warmed up. Tessa glanced back at Declan, who nodded encouragingly. Go on. Mrs. Callahan will take good care of you. I'll explain everything to Mr. Callahan. The warmth of the Callahan kitchen was like heaven after the cold night ride. Martha settled Tessa at the table, took Sarah gently from Declan, and laid her on a small sofa in the corner of the room, covering her with a quilt. Then she stoked the fire in the cook stove and set about making coffee and heating up leftover stew. Now, don't you worry about a thing, she said to Tessa. Whatever's happened, you're safe here. The simple kindness undid Tessa completely. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, releasing all the fear and tension she'd been holding in for months. Martha didn't say a word, just sat beside her and rubbed her back until the storm passed. Outside, Tessa could hear the low murmur of male voices, Declan explaining her situation to Frank Callahan. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was serious. I'm sorry, she said finally, wiping her face with the handkerchief Martha pressed into her hand. I don't usually fall apart like this. No need to apologize, Martha said firmly. Sounds like you've been holding yourself together for far too long as it is. She set a steaming mug of coffee in front of Tessa and patted her shoulder. Drink that. Food will be ready in a jiffy. By the time Frank and Declan came inside, Tessa had composed herself and was gratefully eating the hearty stew Martha had provided. Sarah still slept peacefully on the sofa, exhausted from the night's adventure. Frank Callahan studied Tessa for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. Mrs. Grantham, Declan here tells me you're in a spot of trouble. Says some men in town are after you for debts your husband left behind. Tessa set down her spoon, straightening her shoulders. Yes, sir. My husband, Benjamin, well, he had a weakness for gambling. 6 months ago, he lost everything we had, took out loans he couldn't repay, and then disappeared. The men he owed money to believe he left funds with me before he went. But he didn't. Her voice caught. He left us with nothing. Frank exchanged a glance with his wife, who was hovering protectively near Tessa. These men, Frank said carefully. They're not the law, are they? This isn't about legal debts. No, sir, Tessa confirmed. Harlan McCoy runs the saloon. He and his friends gave Benjamin credit for his gambling. When I couldn't pay, She swallowed hard. They suggested other ways I might work off his debt. Martha made a sound of outrage, and even Frank's weathered face darkened with anger. That ain't happening, Declan said quietly from where he leaned against the doorframe, his voice carrying an undercurrent of steel. Not while I'm breathing. Something in his tone made Tessa look up sharply. The intensity in his eyes when they met hers sent a flutter through her chest. Frank cleared his throat. Well, Mrs. Grantham, seems to me you could use a fresh start. Martha's been after me to hire help around the house since our Jenny married and moved to California. Position's yours if you want it. Room and board for you and your little girl, plus wages. Really? Tessa breathed, hardly daring to believe it could be so simple. Really, Martha confirmed, beaming. And it'll be a blessing having a child around the place again. Gets too quiet with just us old folks. I don't know what to say, Tessa said, tears threatening again. Thank you. Thank you both. Thank Declan, Frank said gruffly. He's the one who brought you here. Tessa turned to the cowboy, who looked almost embarrassed by the attention. I can never repay your kindness, she said softly. Declan shook his head. No repayment needed, Mrs. Grantham. Just glad I could help. Well, Martha said briskly, you both need rest. Declan, you get onto the bunkhouse and catch a few hours sleep before the day's work starts. Mrs. Grantham, Tessa, if I may, I'll show you to Jenny's old room. You and your daughter can settle in there. As Tessa rose to follow Martha, she paused beside Declan. Thank you, she whispered again, for keeping your promise, for keeping us safe. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture both formal and oddly intimate. Sleep well, Tessa, he said. You're home now. The word home echoed in Tessa's mind as she followed Martha up the stairs, her sleeping daughter cradled in her arms. Home. It had been so long since anywhere had felt like home. But as she settled Sarah into the clean, comfortable bed and crawled in beside her, exhaustion overtaking her, Tessa allowed herself to hope that perhaps they had found one at last. The first weeks at the Double Cross passed in a blur of activity as Tessa settled into her new role. Martha Callahan proved to be not just an employer but a friend, teaching Tessa the rhythms of ranch life and treating Sarah like a cherished grandchild. Frank, gruff though he sometimes appeared, had a soft spot for the little girl, carving her wooden toys and lifting her onto his shoulders to see the new calves in the spring pasture. Tessa threw herself into her work, grateful for the safety and stability the ranch provided. She cooked and cleaned, mended clothes, and helped Martha with the vegetable garden. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from the memories of her failed marriage and the fear that had dominated her final months in Lonesome Creek. She saw Declan daily, though their interactions were brief. He would tip his hat to her when they passed in the yard, exchange pleasantries at mealtimes when the ranch hands ate at the main house, or stop to say hello to Sarah, who had developed an immediate attachment to the tall cowboy. Something warm and unfamiliar fluttered in Tessa's chest whenever he was near, but she pushed the feeling aside. Her heart had been too badly broken to risk again. One evening in late April, about a month after their arrival at the Double Cross, Tessa was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the patter of small feet approaching, followed by Sarah's delighted squeal. Mr. Declan, look what I found. Tessa turned to see her daughter racing toward Declan, who was crossing the yard from the barn. In Sarah's outstretched hands was a small bird's nest that had fallen from a tree. Declan crouched down to the child's level, his face breaking into a warm smile. Well now, that's quite a treasure, Miss Sarah. Where did you find it? Under the big tree, Sarah explained seriously, pointing toward an old oak at the edge of the yard. It fell down. The mama bird was very sad. I imagine she was, Declan agreed, examining the nest. No eggs inside, though. That's good. Can we put it back? Sarah asked, her blue eyes so like her father's. Tessa thought with a pang wide and hopeful. Declan glanced up, noticing Tessa watching them. Something in his expression made her breath catch. What do you think, Mrs. Grantham? Should we try to help this mama bird? Tessa moved toward them, unable to resist the invitation in his smile. I think that would be a kind thing to do, she said. But the tree is very tall. How would we reach the branches? Well now, I reckon between the three of us, we can figure something out. Declan winked at Sarah. You hold on to that nest real careful, and I'll get a ladder from the barn. As he strode off, Sarah looked up at Tessa, her face alight with excitement. Mr. Declan is going to help the mama bird, Mama. Tessa smoothed her daughter's dark curls. Yes, he is. Mr. Declan is very kind, isn't he? He's the nicest, Sarah declared with the absolute certainty of a 3-year-old. And he's handsome too, like in your storybooks. Tessa felt her cheeks grow warm. Sarah, she admonished gently, glancing around to make sure no one had overheard. Declan returned with a ladder, and together they went to the oak tree. With Sarah providing very serious instructions from the ground, Declan climbed up and carefully secured the nest in a sturdy fork of branches. There, he said as he descended. Now the mama bird can find it again. Will she? Sarah asked, her small face creased with concern. Birds are smart, Declan assured her, dropping to one knee beside her. She'll find it. And do you know what you can do to help? Sarah shook her head, curls bouncing. You can check on it tomorrow, from down here on the ground. See if she's come back. But remember, mama birds are shy. You have to stay far away and just watch. I will, Sarah promised solemnly. I'll be very, very quiet. Declan chuckled and ruffled her hair. I know you will. You're a good helper. The pure affection in his voice as he spoke to her daughter made Tessa's heart ache with a sweet, unfamiliar pain. It had been so long since she'd seen a man treat a child with such gentle respect. Thank you, she said as they walked back toward the house, Sarah skipping ahead. You're very good with her. Declan shrugged, a hint of color touching his tanned cheeks. She's a special little girl. Smart as a whip. Yes, she is, Tessa agreed, pride warming her voice. She's been through so much, but she's still so trusting, so open to the world. Children are resilient, Declan observed. More so than we give them credit for. He hesitated, then added, and sometimes adults can learn from them. About trust. About starting fresh. Tessa glanced at him, catching the meaning beneath his words. Sometimes it's harder for adults, she said softly. We remember the hurts more clearly. Declan stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Tessa, he said, her name gentle on his lips. I know you've been through hell. I know someone broke your trust in the worst way, but not everyone will. The sincerity in his blue eyes made her throat tight. I know that. Logically, I know that. But your heart needs more convincing, he finished for her. I understand. Just know that I'm not going anywhere. I can wait until you're ready to trust again. Before Tessa could respond, Sarah called from the porch. Mama, Mrs. Martha says it's time for supper. Declan touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that had become familiar and oddly comforting to Tessa. Evening, Mrs. Grantham, he said, loud enough for anyone listening to hear, then added in a lower voice meant only for her. Think about what I said. As May turned to June, life at the Double Cross settled into a pleasant routine. The days grew longer and warmer, and Tessa found herself looking forward to the moments when her path crossed with Declan's. Their conversations were still brief, but increasingly meaningful, small windows into each other's lives and thoughts. She learned that he had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, the middle child of 5, that he had come west at 18, working his way through Texas and Colorado before settling in Montana 3 years ago. That he loved poetry and kept a dog-eared volume of Wordsworth in his saddlebag. That he had the patience of a saint with Sarah and a quiet, unwavering respect for the Callahans that spoke volumes about his character. In turn, she shared pieces of herself. How she had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a schoolteacher. How she had met Benjamin when she was 20 and had been swept away by his charm and grand plans. How she had realized too late that his promises were as empty as his pockets. How she still blamed herself for not seeing the truth sooner, for bringing Sarah into a doomed marriage. You can't blame yourself for loving someone, Declan told her one evening as they sat on the porch steps, watching Sarah chase fireflies in the twilight. Love isn't a mistake, even when the person turns out to be wrong, isn't it? Tessa asked, twisting the simple gold band she still wore. It was the one thing of value Benjamin hadn't pawned, only because she had refused to remove it. I should have been smarter. I should have seen the signs. When you love someone, you see the best in them, Declan said. That's not a flaw, Tessa. That's a gift. He nodded toward Sarah, who was giggling as she cupped her hands around a glowing firefly. And look what came of it. Would you trade her for anything? No. Tessa whispered, watching her daughter's joy. Never. Then it wasn't a mistake, Declan said simply. Just a difficult path to something beautiful. Tessa looked at him then, really looked at him, seeing the wisdom in his eyes and the kindness in his smile. Something shifted in her heart, a loosening of the tight knot of distrust and fear she had carried since Benjamin's betrayal. The next morning, Tessa removed her wedding ring and placed it in a small box in her dresser drawer. It was time to stop defining herself by a failed marriage. Time to look forward instead of back. July brought a heat wave that turned the grasslands golden and made the air shimmer above the distant mountains. It also brought trouble from Lonesome Creek. Tessa was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough while Sarah napped upstairs, when she heard the sound of riders approaching. Through the window, she saw 3 men on horseback entering the ranch yard. Her blood ran cold as she recognized Harlan McCoy's bulky figure at the lead. Martha, who had been shelling peas at the table, noticed her expression. Tessa, what is it? The men from town. Tessa whispered, her hands freezing in the dough. They've found me. Martha moved quickly to the window, peering out. Those 3? Looking for trouble, by the look of them. She straightened her spine, her usually kind face hardening with resolve. Well, they've come to the wrong place. Martha, I should go. I can't bring danger to your home, not after all you've done for us. Nonsense, Martha said firmly. Your family now. We protect our own. She reached for the shotgun that hung above the door. Frank and the boys are out checking the north pasture, but they'll be back soon. We just need to keep these fellows talking until then. Before Tessa could protest further, Martha was striding toward the front door, shotgun in hand. Tessa hurriedly wiped her hands and followed, heart pounding. McCoy and his men had dismounted and were approaching the house when Martha stepped onto the porch, the shotgun held casually but visibly in her arms. Afternoon, gentlemen, she called, her voice pleasant but firm. Something I can help you with. McCoy stopped at the foot of the steps, eyeing the shotgun. He was a broad man with a florid face and small, mean eyes. Looking for someone who belongs to us, he said. Woman named Tessa Grantham. We know she's here. Nobody belongs to anyone on my property, Martha replied coolly. And Mrs. Grantham works for me. Whatever business you think you have with her, you can state it plainly or be on your way. McCoy's face darkened. Her husband owes me money. Lots of it. She's going to pay it back, one way or another. Is that so? Martha's finger moved slightly closer to the shotgun's trigger. And do you have any legal documentation of this debt? Any court orders? Because without those, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave. Tessa stepped onto the porch beside Martha, drawing strength from the older woman's courage. My husband is gone, Mr. McCoy, she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. He left me with nothing. I have no means to pay his gambling debts, and you know it. McCoy's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. You got pretty enough looks to work it off at my saloon, he said with an ugly smile. Or that fancy ranch hand who took you away could pay it. Zimmerman, wasn't it? Heard he's sweet on you. The casual threat against Declan sent a chill through Tessa. Leave him out of this, she said sharply. This has nothing to do with him. Too late for that, Mrs. Grantham. McCoy nodded to his men. Go check the bunkhouse. Find Zimmerman. As the 2 men started toward the bunkhouse, the sound of hoofbeats made everyone turn. Riding hard into the yard came Declan, with Frank Callahan and 3 other ranch hands close behind. They pulled their horses to a stop in a cloud of dust, effectively blocking McCoy's men from the bunkhouse. Problem here, Martha? Frank called, his hand resting near his holstered pistol. Just some visitors who were about to leave, Martha replied pointedly. Declan dismounted and walked toward the porch, his eyes locked on McCoy. There was no fear in his expression, only a cold determination that Tessa had never seen before. McCoy, he said, his voice level. You're a long way from your saloon. Zimmerman, McCoy replied with a sneer. Come to protect your woman? She's not yours to protect. She and her husband owe me, and debts get paid one way or another. She doesn't owe you a damn thing, Declan said, climbing the porch steps to stand beside Tessa. And neither did her husband. I was there the night you cheated him at cards, McCoy. Mark Deck, signals from the bartender. I saw it all. McCoy's face flushed darker. You're lying. Am I? Declan's voice was deadly quiet. Want to take that to the sheriff? Because I'm happy to ride into town with you right now and tell him what I saw. Might interest him to know about the other games you've rigged, too. And the liquor you watered down. And the girls you forced to work upstairs when they can't pay their tabs. A muscle twitched in McCoy's jaw. You threatening me, cowboy? Just stating facts, Declan replied evenly. Now, you've got two choices. You can leave this ranch and never bother Mrs. Grantham again. Or you can push this, and I'll make sure every dirty secret about your business reaches the sheriff's ears. Your choice. For a long moment, McCoy stared at Declan, calculating. Then his gaze shifted to Frank and the ranch hands, all watching with hands near their weapons, and to Martha, whose shotgun hadn't wavered. This isn't over, he growled finally. Yes, it is, Frank said, stepping forward. Mrs. Grantham works for me now. She's under my protection, and the double cross doesn't take kindly to threats against our own. He nodded to his men. Jim, Pete, why don't you escort these gentlemen to the property line? Make sure they find their way back to town without any wrong turns. McCoy glared but knew when he was outnumbered. With a final venomous look at Tessa and Declan, he turned and stomped back to his horse. His men followed, and soon all three were riding away under the watchful eyes of the ranch hands. As they disappeared down the road, Tessa's knees nearly buckled with relief. Declan's arm came around her waist, supporting her. You all right? He asked softly. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The solid warmth of him beside her was both comforting and thrilling. Well, Martha said briskly, lowering the shotgun. I think we could all use some lemonade after that excitement. Frank, check on the men when they get back. Make sure those troublemakers actually left. As Martha bustled inside, Frank following with a final reassuring nod to Tessa, she found herself alone on the porch with Declan. His arm was still around her waist, and she made no move to step away. Did you really see McCoy cheat my husband? She asked. Declan hesitated, then nodded. I did. I should have said something at the time, but Benjamin was already deep in the game by the time I noticed. I didn't think he'd listen to a stranger. Thank you, Tessa said softly, for standing up to McCoy, for protecting us. Again, I told you I'd keep you safe, Declan reminded her. I meant it. She turned to face him fully, looking up into his earnest blue eyes. Why? Why do you care so much about what happens to me and Sarah? Declan's gaze softened. Do you really not know, Tessa? He asked quietly. From the moment I found you behind that church, holding your little girl, trying so hard to be brave. Something in me recognized something in you. Like I'd been waiting my whole life to find you without even knowing it. Tessa's heart raced at his words. Declan, I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. I think I started falling that first night, riding through the dark with you and Sarah. And every day since has just made me more certain. Tears pricked Tessa's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. I'm scared, she admitted. The last time I gave my heart to someone, he broke it so completely I thought it would never heal. I know, Declan said gently, and I'll wait as long as it takes for you to feel safe again. But I wanted you to know where I stand. No secrets, no games. Tessa reached up and touched his face, the stubble rough against her palm. What if you don't have to wait? She whispered. What if my heart is healing faster than I thought possible? Hope blazed in Declan's eyes. Tessa. She stood on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, a gentle, questioning kiss. His arms came around her, strong and tender, as he returned the kiss with a reverence that made her heart soar. When they parted, Tessa was smiling through her tears. I think I'm falling in love with you too, she confessed. And it terrifies me and thrills me all at once. Declan pressed his forehead to hers. We'll take it slow, he promised. One day at a time. But I promise you this. Tessa Grantham, I will never give you cause to regret trusting me with your heart. From inside the house came the sound of small feet on the stairs, and then Sarah's voice calling, Mama? Mr. Declan. They stepped apart, But Declan kept hold of Tessa's hand as Sarah burst onto the porch, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Were you kissing?" she asked with the directness of childhood, making both adults laugh. "Yes, Miss Sarah, I was kissing your mama," Declan admitted, crouching down to her level. "Is that all right with you?" Sarah considered this seriously, then nodded. "Yes, Mama smiles more when you're here, and you tell the best stories." She reached out and patted his cheek solemnly. "You can kiss her again if you want." Tessa covered her mouth to stifle a laugh as Declan's ears turned red. "Well, thank you for your permission," he said gravely. "That's very generous of you." Sarah beamed, then tugged at his hand. "Can we go see if the mama bird is in her nest?" "I was good and waited like you said." Declan glanced at Tessa, who nodded with a smile. "Of course we can," he said, allowing Sarah to pull him toward the oak tree. Watching them go, hand in hand, Tessa felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path that had led her here had been painful and frightening, but as Declan had said, it had brought her to something beautiful, something that felt, for the first time in a very long time, like home. On a bright October morning in 1874, exactly 1 year after the night Declan had found Tessa and Sarah hiding behind the church in Lonesome Creek, he led them to a special spot on the Double Cross Ranch, a gentle rise overlooking the valley, where wildflowers still bloomed despite the approaching autumn. Sarah, now 4 and more talkative than ever, ran ahead, her dark curls bouncing in the sunlight. "Is this the surprise place, Mr. Declan?" she called back. "Almost there, little one," he answered with a smile, his hand warm and secure around Tessa's. The past year had been one of healing and growth for Tessa. She had flourished at the Double Cross, becoming not just an employee but a cherished member of the Callahan family. Her relationship with Declan had deepened slowly, built on friendship and trust, blossoming into a love more profound than anything she had experienced before. When they reached the top of the rise, Tessa gasped. A small picnic had been laid out on a blanket, a basket of food, a bottle of wine, and a vase of late-blooming wildflowers. But what truly caught her eye was the small wooden structure just beyond. It was the frame of a house, just beginning to take shape, floor laid, corner posts erected, the outline of what would clearly become a cozy home. "Declan," she breathed, turning to him in question. He smiled, a hint of nervousness in his eyes. "Frank gave me this parcel of land last month. Said I'd earned it with my work these past years. I've been building in every spare moment." He squeezed her hand. "It's for us, Tessa, if you want it to be." Sarah had already run to investigate the structure, carefully stepping over tools and lumber. "Is this going to be a house?" she called excitedly. "It is," Declan confirmed, his eyes never leaving Tessa's. "A house for a family." Understanding dawned on Tessa's face. "Declan, are you?" He dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hand. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. "Tessa Grantham, this past year has been the happiest of my life. You and Sarah have become my whole world, and I can't imagine a future without you in it." His voice was steady but filled with emotion. "Will you marry me? Let me be a husband to you and a father to Sarah. Let me spend the rest of my days trying to make you as happy as you've made me." Tears of joy spilled down Tessa's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Declan. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise of their future together. Their moment was interrupted by Sarah barreling into them, wrapping her arms around their legs. "Are we going to live in the new house?" she asked, looking up at them with shining eyes. Declan lifted her into his arms. "We are, little one. The 3 of us, together. Would you like that?" Sarah nodded vigorously. "And can I have my own room? With a window to see the horses?" "Absolutely," Declan promised. "Your room will have the best view on the whole ranch." As Sarah chattered about her room plans, Tessa leaned against Declan's side, her heart full to bursting. From that terrifying night behind the church to this moment of perfect joy, the journey hadn't been easy, but it had led her exactly where she was meant to be. "I love you," she whispered to Declan. He kissed her temple, his arms secure around her waist. "And I love you, Tessa. Always will." Together, they looked out over the land that would be their home, the future stretching before them like the vast Montana sky, full of promise, hope, and the certainty that they had found, at last, where they truly belonged.